BDO's Asia Advisory Services Group. And essentially this group has been established out of the desire to better service our private clients who are from Asia or who have connections to Asia in respect of their tax affairs. So we work closely with our member firms in Asia, including Singapore, Hong Kong and China, so that we're fully joined up servicing our clients. And of course, here in London, our focus is on high net worth families who need UK tax advice, whether it be in relation to relocation to the UK, UK-based assets, or UK family connections. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Becky Hartley, and I'm an Associate Director at BDO in London. Having previously spent a few years with BDO in Singapore, I've been heavily involved in the launch of this initiative, and I'm excited to introduce our panelists for our panel discussion today. This will cover residence, real estate, and insights for the Asia-UK market in the UK. The discussion will be moderated by Lee Bijou, who is a partner in our private client team in London. So Lee oversees the Asia Group and has worked with international private clients for many years. Our first panelist is Peter Cheng, who's a director in the private client team in London. Peter has extensive experience working with wealthy families, both in the UK and offshore. He has particular expertise in taxation of non-UK domiciled individuals, offshore trusts, and UK real estate. We're also joined today by Kylie Luo from BDO Singapore. Kylie leads the private client team in Singapore and has over 20 years of experience with a focus on assisting high net worth families with their tax, trust and estate planning issues, including setting up Singapore family offices. I'm also pleased to welcome Charles Penny from Knight Frank. As a member of Knight Frank's private office, Charles is responsible for assisting ultra high net worths and their families to acquire and sell real estate in the UK. Over the last 5 years, Charles has focused largely on outbound investment strategies from Asia. This could be family home, student apartment, or commercial investments. And last but not least, we're joined by Alex Hood from Fragaman. Alex is a senior associate and has many years of experience in the UK immigration law. As part of Fragaman's worldwide private client practice, he advises clients on complex immigration matters and acts for families of high net worth individuals. He has a particular specialism in UK immigration and nationality matters, as well as residence or citizenship by investment applications to various jurisdictions worldwide. And before I hand you over to Lee, I do need to inform you that this webinar will be recorded. So we'll circulate the recording together with our contact details and some materials for more information about the services that we provide. And we're hoping to have plenty of time at the end of the discussion for questions. So please do submit any questions via the Q&A function, which we'll be able to see, and then we can pick those up at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. So welcome, everybody. Let's get straight into it. So the idea of relocation and the theme of global mobility is something that we are talking more and more to our clients about, particularly post-pandemic, where the world feels like it's opening up again. But some of the terminology that clients hear is a bit confusing. There's words like residence, domicile, citizenship, nationality, and it can be a bit overwhelming. So let's just touch on some of that now. Peter, from a tax perspective, what are the important things that people need to know? What does residence mean, for example?
Yeah, thanks, Lee, and good morning, afternoon, everyone. So UK tax residence, as it says on the tin, determines how someone is taxed in the UK. Since 2013, UK tax residence has been determined by legislation known as the statutory residence test. There are a number of tests within that, and it looks at a combination of various factors, including what the person is doing in the UK, plus the day spent. The rules are complicated and highly prescriptive, although it does enable one to obtain some certainty as to whether or not they're a UK tax resident. But the people do often get tripped up. For example, a person can be UK resident by just spending 16 days in the UK under one of the tests. And as for domicile, this is a legal concept. It is different from residence, nationality, and citizenship. Very broadly and simplistically, it is someone who's not originated from the UK and has no intention of settling in the UK permanently.
Yeah, and domicile has certainly been in the headlines quite a lot recently in the UK. And it is absolutely material to understanding how somebody who is living in the UK will be taxed. Peter, is it just worth touching on what that really means in practice?
Sure. As a UK resident, non-domiciled person, there is the ability for them to be taxed on something what is known as the remittance basis. This means that non-UK source income and gains are not taxed until it is brought into the UK. There is a tax charge starting at £30,000 per year for the individual to be taxed on that basis after they have been in the UK for 7 years. And then this increases to £60,000 after 12 years. And after 15 years, the remittance basis is no longer available because the person will become deemed domiciled for all UK taxes. What is important to note is that a remittance is very widely drafted and is not always obvious. As an example, if non-UK funds are used to acquire an asset, for example, painting, and that painting is then imported in the UK, that is a remittance. And another obvious example, but very common, is where non-UK funds are used as a collateral for a loan. And when that loan is used in the UK, that is a remittance of the collateral. And on this point, it's interesting to note that the UK Tax Authority have been changing their views since 2014 from there cannot be a remittance to now there is a remittance of the entire collateral, even if the loan is less than the collateral.
Yeah, so that sounds really complicated. And for me, the lesson is before you come to the UK and before you plan to perhaps buy a home here, to make sure you take advice and understand the ramifications of any particular course of action. But people do focus on the term residency, but residency for tax purposes is very different to things like citizenship, nationality, and doesn't necessarily correspond with where you can or do spend your time. Alex, as an immigration specialist, could you talk a little bit more about the concept of immigration, why it's different to residency, and any trends you're seeing with clients moving between Asia and the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, immigration and tax residence are often considered to be the same thing when in fact they're two connected but very different parts of the relocation puzzle. So immigration residence is broadly the term given to your right to live, work, or study in a particular country. But having an immigration residence per se doesn't necessarily mean you become tax resident. But if you're then looking to progress to permanent residence, say in the UK, or even citizenship, then those are long-term projects that require a significant physical presence in the UK, i.e., over half of your time each year to get permanent residence and even more for citizenship. So to achieve that, then that could clearly have implications on your tax resident status, and as Peter said. So I think what that highlights is that joined up planning in advance of a relocation and then throughout a client's residence in the UK is absolutely key to making sure that the tax and immigration pieces are working in harmony. And in terms of trends from clients relocating from Asia, I think what we'd seen previously and perhaps before the pandemic was clients were looking to establish an immigration residence, maybe in the UK, get a property, but weren't spending significant amounts of time here. But what we are tending to see now is clients considering moving themselves to the UK and having as their primary home, and then looking at obtaining permanent residence or even the security of British citizenship. So that is sort of a trend we're seeing, but again, that highlights the importance of continuing to get tax advice, not only at the start of the process, but also during your period of residence in the UK, particularly if you're progressing to permanent residence or citizenship.
Yeah, and it feels to me like joined up tax and legal advice, both at the start and throughout, is essential, particularly as rules change so often and can be very complex.
Yeah, absolutely, it's critical.
Sticking on property for a moment, and of course some individuals will buy property to live in, others will buy it as an investment, perhaps to rent out. Charles, what trends are you seeing in the real estate market in the UK, particularly with regard to clients from Asia?
Thanks, Lee. I think what's been abundantly clear is that the UK has this perennial attraction for either investment or personal use. Crudely speaking, it used to be if it was buying for income or buying for personal use or for capital growth, and if you're lucky, trying to straddle sort of two of those investment strategies. Look, we're very fortunate to be an international business, so we can talk to these flows of wealth and investment across jurisdiction and cross sector. I think talking to the Asian market, I think it would be remiss of me not to sort of widen the frame, so to speak. I think following the last peak of the residential market in 2014, the UK went through quite a difficult time with EU referendum, rises in stamp duty tax at the time, and a political uncertainty. This made difficult trading conditions in the UK, but there was a currency advantage. So we started to see a sort of slightly higher number of buyers from Asia look at London from an opportunistic view. And the pandemic then stopped this due to, unfortunately, obviously travel restrictions, which created this sort of two-tier market, so to speak. So immediately following the pandemic, it was a very domestically driven market. So the house market for the first time outstripped the apartment market. Of course, apartments being bought typically by international purchasers. And this race for space, we all saw in the headlines, secondary markets, regional markets such as the countryside and commuter belt becoming very, very popular. Well, now as the cities reopen, businesses reopen and travel is easing, we're starting to see the return of the international buyer, and the city centre locations do very well. So what's happened sort of most recently? Well, it depends on the asset class. Commercial property, so buyers looking for income. This has been dominated really in the West End and the city by private capital from mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore, making some big splashes into the market. In the residential market, we've seen, I think, buyers as a general sort of sense move away from what was typically known to us. Where would Asian buyers initially look to invest? Well, it might be infrastructure led, for example, looking at big regeneration schemes around King's Cross, Canary Wharf, or along the Elizabeth line, for example. We've seen buyers probably take a longer term view and have moved into larger house markets. So we're seeing Asian buyers pop up more often in what would have typically been more domestic or European areas such as Holland Park, St John's Wood, where you get a larger property with garden and potentially enhanced security. And so it's an interesting trend that we're starting to play out. Obviously, education is probably one of the biggest reasons for families in particular looking to move. And again, that might lead to a growing market share of Asian buyers looking in the house market as opposed to just apartments. And generally, appetite seems very strong. And I think where the pound is a little weaker at the moment, the expectation is for a sort of stronger market looking forward, continued house price growth, although a little slower than the last year or two. I think that paired with the wealth creation that is coming out of Asia, buyers from the region are going to make a significant impact in London and also regional UK. as well.
And have you seen increased interest in regional UK in recent years?
I think definitely. I think areas such as Manchester and Birmingham for maybe the last 5 or 6 years have been very popular. Our offices there deal a lot with Asian capital, whether that be institutional or private into the build to rent or student housing sector, but also buying new build properties. I think the reason being is the entry point, the actual capital sum is easier than London, and the capital growth story around infrastructure such as HS2, or generally just looking at the market moving away from London. There was a lot of talk, obviously, and translated to finance jobs and so on, moving up to areas like Birmingham and Manchester. But more recently, I think I'm being asked sort of considerably more about Oxford and Cambridge, either linked because their businesses, if it's in life sciences or biotech, it's very interesting around the universities, that arc between Oxford and Cambridge, but also just from a personal use of property, being an hour, 1.5 hours from central London, good secondary schooling as well. So that's a popular conversation from Asia at the moment.
Yeah. And thanks, Charles. And Peter, in terms of what you're seeing from clients moving to the UK, or perhaps already in the UK, who are looking for advice around buying UK property, what sort of things do they need to consider from a tax perspective?
Well, one thing is they really, as to how they should be acquiring the property. This is one question that always comes up, but this is really driven by how they are going to use the property. Will they be using debt? Will it be let out? Do they need access to the rental income? If so, or will that rental income be invested? So really, I think there isn't one answer that fits all, because what works for one client may not work for another. However, buying a residential property for own use, since the various property changes that have been introduced since 2013, this has really moved towards personal ownership.
And why is that?
Because there's a lot of advantages before 2013, and since 2013, a lot of the tax benefits, you can say, has been taken away. For example, one of the key ones is in 2013, they introduced this annual tax charge where a property is held by an entity in which you as a shareholder can use. And over time, more and more changes were introduced. And in 2017, what they've introduced is inheritance tax charges on an entity that owns UK residential property.
Yeah. And there will still be some individuals who choose to buy property direct, or they may choose to buy the shares in a company that already owns a property. They're two of the routes that we typically see, and each bring very different considerations. Charles, from a practical perspective, what are your observations in terms of people buying properties direct versus buying shares in a company that might already own high-end real estate in the UK?
Yeah, well, Peter's absolutely right. We used to see special purpose vehicle companies be used all the time, going back 5-10 years ago. It's far less common now. And in the simplest form, a buyer is looking at 3 potential taxes along the life of the property, to oversimplify it massively, but stamp duty on the purchase, potential annual tax on enveloped dwellings, and then capital gain if it's a second home or held in the company. I think in reality, to speak to the market today, a lot of buyers from Hong Kong ask me this question. It's my understanding that a lot of real estate transactions are done by a share purchase agreement, so buying the shares in the company. We're asked quite often in the UK for those buyers that are potentially looking at a more short-term solution. I think just simply working out the maths of what stamp duty would cost versus the annual tax on enveloped dwellings, which may increase annually over time, as a charge. It's obviously a banded tax, and simply working out if I'm owning this property for more than 10, 12, 15 years, actually, it probably makes sense to pay stamp duty on the purchase, and therefore I'll buy in my personal name. I think from an agent, when approaching these deals, if there is a property that is owned in a company already, which could be acquired, it's establishing whether the company is deliverable in terms of the assets held, and obviously where there's any sort of inherent pregnant gain in the property, which it will add another negotiation in terms of how to deal with the capital gain in the company as well. But I think this, in reality, it translates to very few in the market, in the residential space, probably more so in the tenanted rental investment market, so blocks of multiple flats, where we might see that.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. And also, I suppose, with increased transparency now, the confidentiality and privacy that structures might have provided in the past won't necessarily be there moving forwards. So something else to bear in mind, I guess. Just flipping this on its head for a moment, we know that Singapore has also seen an influx of families moving there from other parts of Asia in recent years, particularly because of interest in the family office space. Kylie, how has the family office market developed in recent years?
Well, it's picked up a lot. Okay, so just to give you a sensing of the numbers, in 2017, we did about 20 to 30 structures. And last year alone, we have done a few hundred structures. So to date, we have done about 1,000 family office structures. Of course, half have been approved and they are in the official numbers with the MAS. The other half is still in the pipeline, so it's in various stages. You know, we are still in the submission stage. Some we are still, you know, discussing with the clients, you know, in terms of their structures. So it has certainly increased a lot. 60% of our clients come from Greater China area, so that would be your mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau. About 30% of our clients would come from Southeast Asia, so that includes Singapore, Indonesia especially, and also Malaysia. And of course, the remaining 10% comes from, you know, all over the world, especially the UK, US, Canada, and also Australia. So, you know, the clients all over the world, they come to Singapore for various reasons. Okay, people from North Asia, I would say it's because of tax residency, because they want to change their tax residency. Okay, it's for CRS purposes sometimes. Some is for immigration purpose, because they want to come to Singapore being the safe haven for not just their assets but also their family. For people from Southeast Asia, it would be mainly for tax reasons, because, you know, Singapore Family Office is essentially a tax exemption regime. So because of the favorable tax rules, and of course they know that, you know, having assets in the BVI, deriving income and saying that they don't need to pay tax is not a very sustainable position. So they actually come to Singapore to set up family office. So it's for immigration and tax reasons. And of course, because of that, you know, the Singapore tax authorities, as well as the MAS, which is our reserve bank, they have also increased the threshold for setting up family offices. It used to be like 5 or 10 million, you can set up a family office, but now the MAS requires 20 million Singapore dollars. So that's about 15 million USD. And of course, in terms of count, it used to be one person, but now we require at least 2 investment professionals for such structures, because we do require the substance to be in Singapore if you want to enjoy the tax exemption scheme in Singapore. Yeah.
And I know, like us, Kylie, you'll have lots of conversations with individuals around things like succession is a key thing that is on lots of clients' minds. You know, business continuity, all of the usual things. And I guess a family office structure can help meet their broader aims, not just tax.
Certainly. I mean, sometimes families may put a trust on top of these structures. That's for succession planning purposes. And of course, another objective of setting up such structures would be to, build a platform for their second generation or the third generation to be able to manage the family's assets. So this would be their private assets, different from their business assets.
Yeah. And Peter, we have lots of conversations around whether a structure is appropriate for an individual client or their family. What kind of things might you say to clients who come to you and say, look, help me form a structure?
The first thing I say is the first thing I'd do actually would be understanding what the client is trying to achieve. What is their objective? So we don't start from the structure, we'll start from what they need and then decide on what the options available to them and then what the tax implications are relating to that particular structure. Yeah.
And certainly tax is featuring lower down the list in terms of the order of things that we discuss, as wider things like succession, ESG, lots of other things at the forefront of families' minds at the moment, having very different sorts of conversations. Actually, it's really interesting. Now, just going back to the subject of immigration, because one of the key themes of this discussion is relocation. We all saw that the Tier 1 investor visa was recently removed by the UK government. Alex, does that mean that all is lost? What are the options open to individuals wanting to come here?
Yeah, so short answer is no, thankfully. I hate to use the word unprecedented, but the investor visa closing without notice was exactly that. So it was unexpected. I think we're unlikely to see a like-for-like replacement for the investor visa in the UK because there's an overall kind of global trend moving away from purely passive investment routes as a means of establishing an immigration residence towards more active routes requiring creation of jobs, active involvement in running a business. And so we're unlikely to see a direct replacement, but there are many other alternative options and then hopefully some changes coming down the line later this year from the UK government as well. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of options as examples of solutions for clients. So it depends on the circumstances, but you'll probably be aware of the B&O visa, and that is anyone who was a Hong Kong national before 1st of July 1997 had the opportunity to become a B&O, British national overseas. It's no longer possible to become one, but if you have that status, you won't have lost it. And so any B&O can apply to come to the UK on pretty straightforward terms. They just need to show they've got enough funds to support themselves for the first 6 months. And after 5 years of residence in the UK, and that does require you to spend more than half of your time here each year, you can get permanent residence and then citizenship. So the Home Office did a study recently and we've seen that over 100,000 people have now applied under this programme. And we're seeing a bit of a change. So previously, high net worth B&O clients who might have been eligible were still preferring the investor route for various reasons. But they are now increasingly looking at the B&O visa as a viable way to relocate to the UK. And I think as the programme is sort of getting more established, clients are becoming more confident that it's a genuine kind of credible way to relocate to the UK. And then in terms of other options, the UK government introduced a whole new suite of global mobility visa routes in April 2022. And one which may be of interest to clients is what's called the expansion worker route. And that's where you've got an overseas company who's looking to establish a branch or a subsidiary in the UK. And they want to send a senior employee to the UK or perhaps the CEO of the business to start that branch. And previously there was a similar category, but it precluded majority shareholders from applying. but that restriction's now being removed, so there's more flexibility there. So this could be a potential option for clients who are looking to invest and establish a presence in the UK, and it enables them to establish an immigration residence as well. And importantly, you can then switch into what's called the skilled worker route once you're in the UK, which leads to permanent residence. And then the final point to touch on is the innovator visa. And that's been in place for a couple of years, and it's proven to be quite cumbersome. So it requires a new innovative business idea, it requires endorsement, and the route to permanent residence is based on the success of the business. And that's quite risky sort of proposition for clients. But there are planned reforms coming in October 2022 for this route. And the government have told us that it's designed to make it more attractive for investors, and it's been mooted as a partial replacement for the investor visa. So I don't think it's going to be the same as the investor visa. It's not going to be a purely passive investment route, but we're hoping that it's more flexible and it's going to be an attractive proposition for high net worth families who might be looking to relocate to the UK.
Sure. And certainly when I'm talking to clients, I say, start your planning as early as possible because it can take longer than you might think. How soon, Alex, should people be talking to you before a planned move to the UK? Bearing in mind, there's a lot to do.
Yeah, there is, right. And I think the thing to bear in mind with immigration now and with the investor route having been closed is that it's likely to involve more planning, a bit more work, and a longer term sort of plan of how you're going to be actively involved in the UK economy in order to secure the appropriate visa and residence and progress to permanent residence. So it's going to be absolutely possible, and the UK wants to attract investment, but it's going to take a bit more planning than perhaps previously. And so I would say the ideal solution is you start talking to us maybe a year in advance when you're also speaking to tax advisors and looking at properties. And that's the ideal scenario. But I should say you can buy a property in the UK without having an immigration status. You can even do that as a visitor. So there's some flexibility to do that. But importantly, if you're here as a visitor, you can't then switch into a long-term immigration category from within the UK. So whilst you can get those wheels in motion, you really do need to have an idea of which way you're going to go on the immigration piece, so that you can get that in place when you need it.
Yeah, understood. And I guess the same question to Kylie. Kylie, if somebody was looking to relocate to Singapore and was interested in the family office space, how early should they start their discussions with you?
Well, because the timeline to set up family office now has increased from, previously was 6 to 8 months. Now is about 10 to 12 months to get everything done, to get the tax incentive approved, to get your structure set up. So I would say, start as early as possible. If you're looking, for example, to come to Singapore to stay, to get your employment pass, say by the end of the year, then you should start now. And if you want to get your tax incentive, say before the end of next year, you should also start your conversation now, because the queue is just getting longer. Okay, between 11th of April and 18th of April, and that was the week that the MAS changed the policies. So that week alone, we had a couple of hundred applications go in. So you can see that now the processing time just for the preliminary assessment used to take 1 month. Now it's taking up to 6 months. So you can see that it can only get longer and longer. And therefore, I would advise clients, if they are really looking to set up a family office in Singapore, they should start as soon as possible. This is also because, by the end of 2024, the scheme may not be, renewed. So again, we have to see, if it's the appropriate scheme for the client, for the family, and therefore they should start to have the conversation early.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should just say, before we will wrap up shortly, but if you have any questions for the panelists, please post them in the Q&A, and we will get to them after we wrap up here. Peter, then, what in kind of bringing this part of the discussion to an end, what would you say are the key things that individuals need to be mindful of before moving to the UK?
Yeah, I would say, firstly, they really need to plan in advance, which is the point you touched on with Alex. And from our perspective, or tax perspective, we would normally say at least 6 to 12 months before they come to the UK, and preferably in the UK tax year before arrival, because the way the statutory resident test works is that someone is either resident or not resident in the UK for the entire tax year. So someone who's coming in during this year could find themselves resident from the 6th of April this year, i.e. the start of this current tax year. And the other thing that I would say is people need to be careful about what they see and hear, because there are a number of fictions that's floating around in the marketplace. For example, that an individual can only be UK tax resident if they spend at least 183 days in the UK, which, when I mentioned earlier, it can be as low as 16 days. Another one is a student visa holder can never be UK tax resident. And I believe that may be a mistake there with the immigration position, because that certainly is not the case from a UK tax perspective. And another common misunderstanding that we hear a lot is a non-UK trust can never have a UK tax charge.
Yeah, there are a lot of myths out there that need busting, really. And actually, we have produced a flyer, for want of a better word, on things that people might want to think about before they come to the UK and the associated timings, and we can perhaps circulate that with some of the materials after the call. Brilliant, thank you everyone. Becky, I'm happy to go to questions now.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, we've got a few that have come in. So first one is for Kylie. And I think you sort of touched on this earlier, but do you see clients coming to you that have UK connections and they're still able to set up family offices in Singapore?
Well, I have had clients with UK connections, but of course, at the same time, we work with our UK office, with yourself, Becky, and also with Peter, to ensure that, from a UK perspective, they don't have any adverse tax consequences, which would compromise the tax benefits that they would get from the Singapore family office. Yeah. So certainly from a Singapore angle, there is nothing stopping a UK tax resident from setting up the family office. It's whether it's suitable for them from a home country perspective.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks. And there's a question for Charles. Are you able to share anything about forecasts for the UK real estate market?
Yeah, sure. I think important first to say, obviously, a lot of the real estate agencies produced 5-year forecasts, which came out earlier this year. I think it does feel like we're at a little bit of a crossroads at the moment, or sort of momentary sort of pause for consideration with things like interest rates going up, potential supply coming onto the market. But Knight Frank produced their 5-year forecast. So prime central London is outperforming the rest of the UK. The reason for that is that we see the return of the international buyer. So we're predicting 22% over the next 5 years. That is relatively low growth, single-digit growth this year, going up to 6% next year, versus the rest of the UK, which I believe our 5-year forecast is between 13 and 14% house price growth. Obviously, there are areas that will outperform and underperform. It's very much a guide, but we really believe, looking at the cycle in the market, as I mentioned earlier, 2014 to 2020, we had year-on-year negative house price growth, and I think that there's you know, some room for some really interesting markets as well, where there's infrastructure both in London and outside of London that will outperform that.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. There's a question for Peter. So I think you mentioned a bit about transparency, and someone wants to know a bit more about the property register that they've heard about.
Yeah, sure. This was something that was first mentioned by the then Prime Minister David Cameron back in 2016 to cracking down on criminals using UK property to launder money. So the law to introducing this register was finally passed in March this year, but we are still waiting for the regulations to be issued so that the law or the register becomes live. And once the register becomes live, then it will require people who hold UK property or thinking about acquiring UK property to provide details to Companies House regarding the beneficial owner. And that is broadly someone who indirectly or directly holds 25% of the shares of the voting rights in the overseas entity. A couple of points to note is that the register is publicly available, free of charge, and also the failure to register or keep the register updated is a criminal offence that can carry a fine and imprisonment. So pretty serious.
Yeah, we're just waiting for the implementation of that to come in, aren't we? Yeah, thank you. There's another question for Kylie about the property market in Singapore, because they've heard there's been some changes that have come in recently for stamp duty.
Yes, yeah. So the property market has been very hot, okay, since the start of the pandemic, and the reason is because a lot of wealthy families coming to Singapore, and also because of working from home model. So the demand, the rental has gone up by at least 50%, especially in the better areas. The property prices have increased by at least 30% since the start of the pandemic. So because of that, the government has came up with 2 cooling measures. So one was late last year when they increased the stamp duty. So if for a foreigner to buy a Singapore residential property in Singapore used to be about 25% in stamp duty, but it has increased to 35%. And if you use a company, whether it's a Singapore company or foreign company, to buy Singapore residential property, then it's up to 39%. So it's actually very expensive. And about 2 weeks ago, they have also changed the rules to say that if you use the living trust, that means if you use a living trust to purchase the properties, because some of our clients, they actually have children who are first-time buyers, and they can enjoy the stamp duty concession, or if they are US persons, they can also enjoy the stamp duty concession. So they use the living trust to buy. But the rules have changed, and they're saying that even if you do that, you would still be subject to the same stamp duty as if you are the foreign person. So it's up to 35%, unless stamp duty relief applies and you have to apply for the concession. It takes about 6 months to know the result. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. I've got a question for Alex. So you mentioned that there are going to be some changes coming in later in the year. Do you know what those are going to look like at all?
Yeah, so we don't yet have the detail. What we have is a government announcement that they are planning to reform the existing innovator visa route, and that's due to come in by autumn 2022. So we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but the government have said that it's designed to make the route more attractive to overseas investors. I think there's an acknowledgement there that the current route isn't perhaps working as well as it could be in terms of attracting investment to the UK. But we do also know that actually at the end of this month, there is a new route coming in called the high potential individual route. And that enables people who've graduated in the last 5 years from what the UK government lists as a top university. And there are 4 universities from China, Hong Kong, and then 2 in Singapore on that list. to come to the UK for 2 years. You don't need a prior job. You can work for whoever you want, establish a business. So that's a temporary immigration residence, and you'll need to find another one after that 2 years is up. But that could be an interesting route, and it's a new one for kind of talented individuals to come to the UK.
Yeah. Okay, great. There's another question for Peter, and I think this topic actually came up quite a lot when I was in Singapore recently, which is talking about, obviously clients are concerned about inheritance tax and their exposure to that. And are you able to discuss a bit around sort of life insurance wrappers? How do they work, and how you would advise clients around what might be best for them?
Yeah, so there is a difference between a classic life insurance policy where it is used to insure a lump sum that is payable on death to cover the inheritance tax, and compared with a lot of investment type products out there, like a life insurance, offshore insurance bond, because that's more an investment. And really, I think it depends upon what the client circumstances are before they invest in one of these products. Because as we discussed earlier, it is more important to understand what they are trying to achieve as opposed to leading with a product first.
Yeah, definitely. And I've just got one final question, which is to Alex and Charles. So obviously both of you are based in London, but do you have offices in Asia as well? So maybe Alex, you could go first.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. We have offices in China, in Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia. So we cover pretty much every jurisdiction, and where we don't have a physical office, we work with local partner firms. So those offices can help with immigration advice for those countries, and then any advice for the UK would be our London office. But we work really closely together, so we're capable of providing that kind of joined up advice between different offices if it's needed.
Yeah, so maybe if anyone's got any queries, they can contact you, and then you can direct them to the right person.
Absolutely, yeah.
Perfect. And Charles?
Yeah, likewise for Knight Frank. So we're in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and then moving into Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand as well. We've expanded our private office to cater for more of the private capital and ultra high net worth families, actively in Singapore at the moment, where we're seeing a lot of demand for that sort of relationship advisor and longer term strategy, cross border and in different geographies. We're opening in Hong Kong, and yes, as a business, we're looking very closely at Asia over the next 5-10 years, definitely.
Yeah, okay, great. I mean, that's all the questions that I had submitted. Lee, I don't know if you've got anything else to add.
No, I thought they were all very clear. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think that's the first webinar that's finished on time, early. Prompt. So no, thank you very much everyone for attending, and thank you to all of our panelists. I think that was a great discussion, covering a lot of hot topics there. So I think, as I said at the start, we'll be sharing some material as a follow-up with our contact details. So if you do have any questions, then please do reach out to us and we'll be happy to assist you.
Yeah, and I think, Becky, also this forms part of our regular World of Private Client webinar series. We have a number of different webinars coming up over the course of the next year, and we will post on LinkedIn and we will send out emails to notify people of topics that may be of interest to them. So yeah, hopefully people enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.